If you don't know Oscar Brown Jr., you should. He was an acclaimed writer, singer, and civil rights activist who used music to comfort, change, and bring the story of black life in Chicago to the entire world. His life is being brought to you now by celebrated performer Morris Gearing, and he joins us right now. Thanks for coming in, Morris. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
I mean, who knew 2 years ago when we met that it would take you 2 years to get here, but I'm glad you made it.
I made it.
Yes.
Persistence.
What is it about Oscar Brown that just kind of changed your life?
Well, first of all, having met Oscar when I was 23 years old, I just finished college and I came over to see a performance of Maya Angelou at Malcolm X College. And I had 7 books. I was armed to meet Dr. Angelou and get them all signed. And they announced before she spoke that there would be an opening act, Oscar Brown Jr. And I began to think, Oscar Brown Jr., Oscar Peterson, Oscar, never heard of him.
Right.
He came on and blew me away. And I thought, how could I be a graduate theater major of a historically black college and not know who this man is? Then he introduced his wife, Jean Pace,
right,
and she just blew me away. So I made a beeline for Oscar.
She's a singer-actress, we should say as well.
I made a beeline for Oscar after the performance, and I said, man, you are incredible. I want to work with you. He said, great, call me. I said, but I don't have your number. He said, you got a pen? So I found a piece of paper on the floor, I found a pen, and he wrote 280-1950, call me.
You remember the number?
I remember the number.
No
I still
way.
have the piece of paper.
No way, no
Yes.
way.
To
and
this
you toured
day,
with him, right?
To this day. I have no idea what became of the Maya Angelou books.
Right. Oh, you never got them signed.
But in that moment,
yeah,
I knew there was something about Oscar, and that's how I entitled the show.
What was the something about Oscar?
Well, you know, I wanted to sing, I wanted to dance, I wanted to act, and I wasn't sure that I was proficient at all of them, or any of them. And when I saw him, he was a great combination of all the things that I wanted to do. So I identified with his style, and I thought that's the kind of performing I'd like to do. So I was lucky enough to study with him for a year, and then he wrote a show, Sliced Apple, and took his daughter, Maggie Brown, and Jean Pace and me on the road in New York for summer. And I sat there every night on the side of a stage after we went off and watched him do something very close to what I'm doing now. And I sat wishing that someday I could have a one-man show. So careful what you ask for.
Exactly. And now you've got it. Good for you.
Yes, thank you.
He meant a lot to a lot of people,
yes,
but a lot of people didn't know who he was. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the times, the system and the record companies sort of gave a big hand in assuring that people wouldn't know who he was. The first album that he did was called Sin and Soul, the second, Between Heaven and Hell, the third, Oscar Brown Jr. Tells It Like It Is. By the third album, they felt he was becoming too radical.
Yeah, a little too controversial back then.
Too controversial.
Yeah, yeah.
So they forced him to do the fourth album, which is called Oscar Brown Jr. in a New Mood, the album he hated most. That whole album is nothing but standards. And so I really, really, really admired the fact that he was passionate as an artist and as a man and as a black man, and that he really didn't care what the trends were.
Yeah.
And he couldn't be labeled. He really wanted to beat to his own drum and follow his own heart. And that really affected me. That struck me.
And the last album you said was standards, and there's nothing wrong with standards, but he liked original music. He wanted to do his own thing.
Oh, yeah. Oscar Brown Jr. penned over 1,000 songs. Wow. I've never done the same show in the 6 years twice.
Really? You change up the music because you have plenty to go from, right?
Over 1,000 songs. I could never do the same show. However, there are certain standards that are there. Signifying Monkey is almost a must-have every night. People really want to hear that. And we open with City on the Lake, which is a wonderful, wonderful song about Chicago. And the song Lucky Guy has become a real favorite of the show.
We should say he grew up in Inglewood.
Yes.
And he died only at 78 years old.
Yes, 2005. We lost him way too soon.
Yeah, way too soon. When you have performed in New York, a lot of people knew who he was, but some people came up to you and said, hey, thank you for introducing me to Oscar Brown Jr.
Right, absolutely. Well, you know, Oscar, he was hip. He was one of the cats. And he was rather liberal. Not rather, he was very liberal for the time. And if you were not involved with that scene and that kind of music, there's a chance that you missed him. But we're trying to keep him alive, and we're introducing him to new audiences, and I'm quite pleased with that.
Is it sad that more people didn't know who he was and they didn't get a chance to experience his originality and his uniqueness?
Well, it is, but you know, again, we are doing everything we can to keep him alive, to introduce him to new audiences. People are falling in love with the show. Yeah. And I think what happens is there's a resurgence of people wanting to see intelligent entertainment. Oscar called it edutainment. It's not enough just to entertain people. You should educate people and help them to learn something about their history or your history, or something about the background of what you're doing.
Right. He had, what, 5 kids, right?
6.
6 kids,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
6.
And I know that his daughter Maggie is still around. She's performing. And
Maggie is wonderful. She's done the show with me a couple of times. In fact, she was there last Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
She's like a sister to me. We've known each other since we were kids. And she in Africa have been a tremendous support.
Yes, his other daughter,
yes.
yeah. What's next for you? I mean, continuing with Oscar Brown?
We'd like to continue polishing it. Chuck Smith from the Goodman Theater has done a marvelous job of directing it for the last 6 years. And we really have just been trying to get it down, to really polish a show and to figure out what works. So we're next in New York at Valerie Simpson's place, Sugar Bar, June 12th and 13th, and hopefully back in Chicago later in the summer.
And we should say folks can come out on Tuesday to catch you.
Tuesday night,
yeah.
7:30 at the Jazz Showcase. It's a hot show. I hope you'll come out.
I bet it is a hot show.
I want you to see it.
I want to see it too.
Come on.
Well, I got to work, but we'll figure it out.
Can I give you a note?
Yeah, really. I'll take one. I'll give it to my news director. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm
Looking
so honored to be here.
Good for you. I'm sure Oscar's looking down, very proud of you.
And I'm looking up. Thank you.
Well, you can see something about Oscar through April 21st at the Jazz Showcase, and that's at 806 South Plymouth in the South Loop. And when we return, guess what? A performance by Morris as Oscar Brown Jr., so stay with us.
Breaking rocks and serving my time. Breaking rocks of cheer.